Mr. President.
Senator from Connecticut.
Thank you, Mr. President. These trade agreements are a big deal, and trade promotion authority used to mean setting tariffs. Now they can affect everything from the safety of our food to the working conditions of people around the world, environmental standards, and very frankly and simply, that means that Americans should know what the agreements say and what our government is saying about them, and they should be given that information while there's a meaningful chance to influence them. And I hope to influence them through this deliberative process. It's supposed to be open and transparent. And I have two amendments. One that would promote greater transparency in trade agreements, and the second to help ensure that foreign countries cannot use trade agreements to undermine the safety and security of America's food supply. First, on the subject of transparency, nothing is more fundamental than for the American people to know what's in these trade agreements. And despite their significance, despite the far-reaching ramifications and implications that they have for our American economy and indeed our way of life, they're being negotiated in secret. In fact, members of Congress can view them only if they go to secure locations, and staff of members of Congress can see them only if they're accompanied by the members themselves. The real problem is not members of Congress or their staff, but the American public, who are kept in the dark. They're the supposed beneficiary of these deals, and yet they are kept from knowing what's in them. The TPA would allow the text of an agreement to be made public only after it's already finalized, a point that is way too late for the people most directly and urgently affected by the deal to do anything but try to get Congress to vote down the whole thing in its entirety at once. That's not productive. That's not fair. More transparency would allow disputes over particular provisions to be resolved individually on their own. And this kind of practice is really not in accordance with our democratic condition, an open and transparent process to set policy, whether it's trade policy or any other issue of economic and political consequence. And so, making the TPA more transparent is a relatively easy fix. My amendment would do it. This amendment would require the publication of, quote, formal proposals advanced by the United States in negotiations for a trade agreement, end quote. Formal proposals advanced by the United States in negotiations for a trade agreement. That means that the United States, when it takes an official position and offers it to another country, ought to tell the American people, its own people, not just the people or rulers of another country, but our own people. They have a right to know when this administration or any other offers something to people of another country, and my amendment would require that basic protection and transparency. Very importantly, this amendment would not prohibit confidential negotiation or closed-door deliberations. Some off-the-record discussion, no questioningly, is necessary for effective consideration of any multilateral agreement. And this amendment would not affect negotiations specifically relating to tariffs and similar market access provisions that are the traditional subject of trade negotiations. Some negotiations have to be done in confidence, in private, but basic positions, official proposals, are outside this realm. Proposals that look more like traditional legislative policymaking because they can involve give or take, sacrifices from the American people, and give and take by other countries. They can align standards for regulation across a number of areas, from drug development to finance. Other countries can be encouraged. They can be empowered to adopt stronger protections for workers, for clean air and water and more. But harm can be done if trade agreements undermine American laws and American protections for health, safety, and security of our citizens. There are a number of amendments that I have supported that will directly address labor issues, environmental issues, security issues. This amendment would simply ensure that all of these issues are considered in an open, fair, transparent way, so the American people, not just we in this chamber, not just our negotiators, not just the president and his advisors, the American people know what is happening. Publication of formal proposals, which is a term of art in trade agreements, would bring American transparency practice in line with the general practices of our European allies. The European Union countries engaged in the TTIP negotiations, announcing that they will post on the internet all textual proposals that will be offered to the United States, as well as position papers, establishing their approach and analysis, and America should simply do the same. We are a nation that prides itself on leading the world in transparency and openness and democracy. We should not be behind our European allies on that score. I'm very grateful for the support of Senator Brown, a tremendous leader in this effort to ensure that American trade agreements work for the American people, as well as Senator Baldwin and Senator Udall, and I urge other colleagues to support this amendment and the other amendment that I'm offering on food safety. And I'm grateful, again, to have the support of Senator Brown on this one. It would establish as a principal negotiating objective of the United States the protection and promotion of strong food safety laws, as well as regulations and inspection system. Enforcement is key. Standards are vital. Ensuring that trade agreements do not weaken or diminish our food safety standards ought to be a given. We take for granted all too often that our food is safe until we discover that it isn't, until we find there are food poisoning tragedies that result from unsafe food. We saw at the beginning of the last century, unscrupulous corporations can cut corners by skimping on food safety, or worse, by introducing dangerous additives or adulterations to food, making or processing them under unsafe, unacceptable conditions. They may save money, but they sacrifice lives and safety. And the consequences in real lives and real time can be disastrous, not only in lives, but in dollars. The majority of food manufacturers and producers take their safety responsibilities seriously. The majority in this country certainly do, but what about abroad? What about in other countries? What about in countries where the standards are non-existent or not enforced? A campaign of dedicated advocacy and scientific research led to a system of food inspection in this country, which is far from perfect, but way ahead of other countries, and gives Americans the confidence they need and deserve to walk into any supermarket or restaurant in this country and feel trust deserved because it is earned and because the laws are enforced. Not all countries, unfortunately, follow these practices. Few countries have the standards that ours does. Food production is still under-inspected, spoiled, or adulterated in those countries. And that's the product that we want excluded from this country if they fail to meet those standards. I'm concerned that this trade agreement will affect our own food safety regulations by introducing those deficient products, unsafe food, into this country. And my amendment directs negotiators to ensure that that food is affected by this agreement, to ensure that imports of that food do not undermine trust and confidence of our people in our own food as well as products from abroad. Countries with less stringent standards protecting their citizens should not be permitted to use trade agreements to force this country to imitate them. Trade is a crucial part of the American economy. It's an essential part of our Connecticut economy. Trade, when it's done right, is a great boon to many, many people and our entire economy. Defense and aerospace, small manufacturers, furniture and food companies in Connecticut all thrive because of trade. I want the world to see what Connecticut businesses have to offer, what our exports can do for them. I know we can compete with anyone, and I know how important exports are to my state. But I also know trade deals can have negative, unintended consequences, which is what we want to prevent. Consequences in abuses by foreign governments seeking to subvert or circumvent American regulation, or by giant multinational companies looking to move jobs and capital to where labor is cheapest and can be exploited easiest, or where health or environmental protection are weakest. My amendments would help ensure that the American people know what's in these trade agreements before they're approved, while they're negotiated, and when our food can be protected and transparency assured. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the floor.